I'm Dave, and welcome to the first episode of Season 3 of Zilog and Moto. If this is your first visit to Zilog and Moto, welcome, and I hope you enjoy today's video. Here on Zilog and Moto, I'm on a quest to collect and review each and every English language Sega Master System, Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X game. Basically, if you can play it on a Genesis with some sort of add-on, I'm looking to pick up a copy of it, examine it, play it, and then present my findings. Boy, that sounds really sterile and boring, doesn't it? I've got to be honest, after almost 100 of these reviews, it gets a little difficult to come up with a different way to state what I'm trying to do with Zilog and Moto, but that's part of what makes working on these videos and reviews interesting. From week to week, when I write these scripts, I never quite know what's going to come out, but it always does. So, let's see what's going to come out this week. I talked in last week's video a little bit about how I pick what games to review each week, and sometimes it's based on the time of year. And that's the case with this week's video, which is Winter Olympic Games for the Genesis from US Gold and developed by Epyx, who was responsible for the previously reviewed Paperboy and Gauntlet for the Master System in episodes 32 and 41 accordingly. Winter Olympic Games was released in December of 1993, a few months before the 17th Winter Olympic Games would take place in Lillehammer, Norway. US Gold had a reputation for releasing games on multiple platforms, and a big license like an Olympic-related title was no different, with Winter Olympic Games being released not just for the Genesis, but also for the Master System, which we'll review later, MS-DOS, the Amiga, the Super Nintendo, and finally made appearances on portable platforms with versions on the Game Gear and Game Boy. I mentioned that the Olympics is a big license, and it is. Just think about all the people that watch the Olympics every 4 years, and the fact that it's truly a worldwide sports exhibition, featuring athletes from countries around the globe. And I enjoy the Olympics a lot, the Summer Games more so than the Winter Games, but I'll be honest, sometimes I'm bad about watching the events on TV, just because there's so much going on over a 2-week period, and it's just hard to keep up with everything that's going on. And let's face it, some of the events are kinda, But there are definitely fans of the games, and for 14 days, all they're going to do is eat, sleep, and completely consume whatever's on TV. That leads me to my next point, which is while video games that are based around the Olympics are technically sports titles, they're a bit different than your average game. The Winter Olympics in 1994 specifically consisted in events in 12 different disciplines, with individual classifications of each, and video games based on the Olympics would need to feature in-game modes that represent as many of those disciplines as possible to really capture the feel of the games. So think about that for a second. A developer working on an Olympic title can't just create a good football game or a good basketball game. They've got to attempt to create multiple different engines that are all fun to play. Not the easiest thing in the world, to be sure. So, was Epyx able to produce a quality game that represented the wide spectrum of the Winter Olympic Games while simultaneously creating ports for the Master System, Game Gear, and Super Nintendo? Or do we have a loose selection of mini-games that vary wildly in quality that don't really capture the experience of the Olympics? Well, we'll take a look, but first, here's the package. Okay, here is Winter Olympic Games, and as you can see, it doesn't follow any of the usual Genesis templates for how covers look, which was the case for a lot of third-party titles. And actually, I like that. As much as I like the classic Genesis black box art, allowing developers to do what they want with the covers really allowed them to go wild with the various designs and create some great-looking artwork, like what we have here. On this particular cover, the artwork isn't just limited to the front cover, it also extends to the spine and the rear cover for a nice look. We've got American bobsledders, Canadian speed skaters, and Norwegian downhill skiers, to give you a taste of what's in the package. I'm not a big fan of having the Lillehammer logo directly in the center of the cover, as it kind of makes everything seem cluttered, but whatever, that might have been a requirement of the license. As far as the condition of the game, it's in pretty good shape. There's a few scratches on the outer cover, and I probably need to give it a once-over to get rid of some excess dirt, but it's fully intact with no holes or tears, and the hang tab is still connected to the top. The inner cover art has no sun bleaching, but if you look really close down by the 16 meg emblem, you can see a slight bit of darkening, which was unfortunately related to me using some goo gun on the back. More on that in a minute. Flipping over to the back, and this is a pretty great design. I've said this before, but you can definitely tell a later Genesis release by how well laid out the graphics on the back are, because of the advances in design tools over the years. Winter Olympic Games features 6 screenshots of the various events in the game, and they're all of good quality, with that bobsleigh shot looking especially good. The flavor text in the middle is solid as well, with bullet points laying out the main aspects of the game. I think it probably would have been good for them to say specifically what the 10 events were, rather than just displaying the various screenshots, but I think they had a reason for that I'll get to in the review portion. And if you missed it on the front cover, yes, this is a 16 meg game. By late 1993, there was certainly a lot of focus on how big cartridges were, so US Gold didn't miss an opportunity to let you know. Oh, and one final note, it's mentioned in 2 places that the game is for 1 to 4 players, but just to be clear, this isn't referring to 4 simultaneous players. While a few events allow head-to-head competition, like the Moguls, for all other events you're simply taking turns and passing the controller around. Oh, and last thing, you can't see it anymore, but there was a large nasty bit of sticker goo from one of those metallic stickers on here, and that's why I had to pull out the Goo Gun. I'm sure most of you know this, but if you pull stickers off your boxes, make sure to get rid of all that glue as well, or else it'll just harden and become very annoying to remove. Opening up the box, and the cartridge looks good, and there's a bonus appearance by a warranty reply card. Then there's the manual, which isn't in mint, but it does look to have held together really well over the last 26 years. And I almost missed this detail at first, but there's a nice ad on the back for the Incredible Hulk, and I always like seeing small details like that. The manual's pretty thick, and for good reason, as there's sections for each of the 10 different events that you can compete in. There is a lot of text, and if you think I'm kidding, just take a look. Thankfully, they were smart enough to include some pictures as well, so it's not quite so dry, but they definitely took time explaining each of the events very thoroughly, and I appreciate that. If I've still got questions about how to play a game after reading a manual, that's incredibly frustrating and just a bad product, and there's no questions here. Okay, that's Winter Olympic Games on the outside. Let's get it fired up and see what's on the inside. I mentioned earlier that the 17th Winter Olympic Games in Lillehammer consisted of 12 disciplines. And if you're not familiar with that term, discipline in this case means a specific style of sport. So, while figure skating and speed skating are both forms of ice skating, as far as categorizing things go, they're different disciplines. However, the back of the box specifically mentioned only 10 events, so based on that, we know that there's going to be some stuff missing. But 10 events, that's pretty good, right? It means we're only missing 2 of the disciplines. Well, not so fast. You assume that the 10 events are from 10 different disciplines. In reality, TierText cheated a bit, and inflated their numbers by including 4 different events from the alpine skiing discipline: downhill, Super G, giant slalom, and slalom. So, I hope you like downhill skiing, because it takes up 40% of the game. What's not included? Well, there's no cross-country skiing, which makes sense as that would be like including a marathon in the Summer Games. Nordic Combined was also not included, as it's a mix of cross-country and ski jumping. There's no figure skating, which is a little surprising considering that figure skating is one of the most popular events in the Winter Olympics, in 1994 especially due to the Tonya Harding-Nancy Kerrigan controversy. Also, figure skating was an event in Epyx Classic Winter Games released in 1985, so it had been done before. Finally, speed skating was ignored in place of short track speed skating, and hockey was left out entirely, which I'm probably the most okay with, as it should really be its own game. Oh, and just in case you're wondering, curling? Not a discipline at Lillehammer, so it wasn't skipped, it just wasn't on the list that year. Winter Olympic Games gives you a few options when it comes to playing the game. As I mentioned earlier, you can play it with up to 4 people, and a few of the events can be competed in head-to-head, but limited to 2 people at a time. By default, an Olympic program would consist of you representing one of 16 countries in a run through each of the 10 disciplines. competing against both the computer and any friends in a competition to get to the top of the medal chart after all 10 events. However, if you're strapped for time, or if there are some events you just don't like or aren't good at, Winter Olympic Games also gives you the option to compete in a mini Olympic program where you can pick the disciplines you want to compete in. And finally, if you'd like to practice the events before attempting to compete for medals, Winter Olympic Games has you covered there as well, with a training mode that allows you to run an event as many times as you'd like to allow you to get used to the controls and learn the track layouts before competing in the events for real. I like this setup, and especially the option to create a custom Winter Olympics to compete in with a group of friends. To thoroughly look at the game, I'm going to now go over each of the disciplines, and start with the biggie, downhill skiing. Being that downhill skiing, Super G, Giant Slalom, and Slalom are all so similar, they all use the same engine in game, with the same control scheme. While all 4 of the events are slightly different, they all follow the same concept: get down to the bottom of the hill as fast as possible while making it through a series of flag gates that are placed at different locations on the course, requiring you to constantly choose between speed and control. The controls themselves are relatively simple, and actually the game gives you 3 options as how you can position your skier on the course with the D-pad, so you may want to experiment a bit and decide which one works best for you. Also, as you're skiing down the mountain, you can hold the B button to tuck your skier in an attempt to get more speed as you're navigating the course. All this sounds pretty straightforward, right? Well, there's one absolutely critical thing to being able to navigate a downhill course with speed, and that's being able to see where the upcoming gates are, so that you know if you can tuck for a bit or need to move right or left on the course to be in position to take the next gate or next turn. And guess what? The game positions the camera in a 3/4 view overhead, and it's zoomed in so close to the action that you can barely see about 15 feet ahead of you on the course. Unless you memorize each of the 4 courses, you absolutely have no chance of being able to make it to the bottom without either missing a gate and earning a disqualification, or hitting one of the flags and clotheslining yourself and earning a disqualification. Well, perhaps that's not true. You can make it down the hill if you go very slow, in which case you might as well have been DQ'd, because even in the easiest difficulty, you'll be looking at a 16th place time and not being remotely competitive. Okay, so 40% of the game is effectively broken due to poor choice of presentation. What about the other 6 events? Well, I guess next let's take a look at the short track speed skating. The speed skating implementation is pretty simple. Your skater will go around the rink automatically, while you just have to alternate hitting A and B to increase your speed. However, there's one hitch. You do control your position in the lanes, so if you get close to one of the other 3 skaters, you'll need to move up or down to avoid hitting them and getting a DQ. The goal is to finish first in your heat and then race again in the final attempt to get a medal. However, again, even in the easiest difficulty, no matter how I mashed on the A and B buttons, I was never able to get within 3 seconds of the rest of the competitors. I've never been a fan of the track and field style button mashers, but even in those I could usually be competitive. Something just feels off here. Like short track speed skating, the ski jump is another event when, even though I felt like I was doing the right things, I never came close to being competitive. Which is too bad, because ski jump actually has a control scheme that, while it's a little complex to actually make a game out of it, you're doing the things with a controller that requires skill versus mashing buttons. This is an event that seems like if I'd practiced long enough, I might eventually get good enough at it to be competitive, but when playing it this week, even though I thought I did well, I was still far off the competition. I've been pretty hard on the game so far, and I think for good reason, so let's move on to an event that I feel like they actually did okay on. Well, sort of. And that's the Biathlon. The Biathlon, if you're not familiar, is a mix of cross-country skiing and shooting. During the event, rather than rapidly hit A and B, you're presented with a bar over your character that goes left and right, and you have to keep the indicator in the middle of the bar by pressing left and right to keep your speed. This works really well, and I felt like I could actually have a competitive time in this event. But that's only half the event. 4 times during the course, you have to break 5 targets with 5 shots, and each target left unhit is a penalty. Simple enough. However, your character shoots like he's been hanging at the bar with your cousin Roman. And yes, I know a GTA 4 reference isn't exactly timely, but I'm reviewing a game from 27 years ago. I think all that's out the window. The shooting sections are just an exercise in frustration, much like the rest of the game. And to further confuse things, the manual states that during the last sprint section of skiing, you are supposed to be alternating A and B, but the left and right meter is still in place above your head. I have no idea what to think about this, and I'm assuming the manual is just wrong. Two events that feel like they're at least passable are bobsleigh and luge. Both bobsleigh and luge take place on the same course and involve similar mechanics. In both events, the goal is to make it to the end of the course without crashing in a fast time. Getting to the end is easy, but doing it quickly requires a bit more skill, as you have to turn in the big corners and ride the banks, similar to a stock car's super speedway. And you have to make sure that you can get off the corner smoothly, or else it's a DQ for you. I probably had the most fun with these two events, but even with them, being able to turn in a competitive time just felt out of reach. For all the events I've discussed so far, I could at least see where the designers were going with them, even if I didn't feel like they were implemented correctly, or that the computer was just too difficult to compete with. But there's one last event. Oh boy, this event. Freestyle Moguls. First off, the event starts with not a normal starting beep or pistol. Oh no, it starts with a rooster crowing. I have no idea why. Because it's more of an extreme sport, so it has to be edgy? Bizarre is more like it. And the event is just uncontrollable. Supposedly, you have to hit left and right while your skier is going the opposite way, and when you have enough speed built up, you have to hit either the A button or B button at the right time to pull off a trick. Whoever thought up this control scheme should be taken out in the street and shot. It simply doesn't work, and I never came anywhere close to figuring it out. One final kick to the nuts is the structure of the Olympics and how scoring is done. In real life, Olympic scoring is very simple. For every gold medal, a country gets 3 points, silvers are 2, and bronzes are 1. So, did Epyx implement this? No. Instead, it has some weird scoring system where I guess performances are rated based on what the computer thinks is a perfect run, and the country is awarded points out of 1,000 based on that. It makes no sense, and it's not explained in the manual. I don't know how you mess up a scoring system that's been around literally forever, but they did it. I spent a lot of time talking about the content of the game and where things obviously went horribly wrong, but I haven't talked about the technical merits of the game yet, so I probably should get into that at least briefly. On both the front and rear covers, the game mentions that it's a 16 megabit game, and after playing it, that feels accurate. Believe it or not, the game features really good music and a lot of different tracks to keep things from getting boring. And there's a decent slate of sound effects as well. And the in-game graphics, while not being anything too special, all look good, and each of the individual event engines are animated well, with the Biathlon having a nice foreground snow filter as a cherry on top. However, this could have been a 64 megabit game, and it ultimately wouldn't matter, as no matter how good the graphics and sound are, it simply doesn't play well. I thought a while about what rating to assign to this game, and it wasn't an easy choice. I do believe in assigning merit where merit is due, and Epyx's graphics and sound programmers do deserve credit for producing a nice looking and better sounding video game that reflects the Winter Olympics. However, this game just simply isn't fun to play, at all. I played it for a good 4 hours, and at least 90 minutes of that was trying and failing to get used to the downhill skiing events. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot of time, but it's not a complicated game. Any gamer with decent skill shouldn't have that much difficulty even getting competitive and easy. And if you want to say I'm just mad because I suck at the game and I didn't put enough time into it, fine, well, go right ahead. But this is a poor game that made me think I'm bad at games, and for that, I'm assigning it a bomb rating. I'm sure some people worked very hard on producing this game, but it doesn't matter. Even American Gladiators back in episode 28 gave me more of a sense of satisfaction in playing this game, and that game was just on my top 10 worst of all time last week. Don't play this. It's literally not worth your time.
Well, what a way to kick off Season 3 of Zilog and Moto, huh? Eesh.
I didn't have high expectations for this game, but I was hoping it'd be at least serviceable, and maybe able to earn a few medals. No. I've got to be honest, if the Genesis version was this bad, I'm a little scared of how poor the Master System version might be. I guess I'll find out in another 100 episodes or so. Tune in next week when I really hope I don't have another poor game to review. This has been a rough few weeks. I'll be staying on the Genesis and switching genres entirely to get away from sports. I'll be playing an Atari classic that started out in the arcades and that I've never played, either in the arcades or the subsequent ports to the consoles. I think it's one of Pat Contry's favorite games, or at least it certainly gets talked about by him a lot anyway. Maybe one of these days I'll be able to actually ask him about that in person, once conventions are a thing again. Remember, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.